Welcome to Throwback Thursday, a podcast celebrating Thursdays and its history. And now, your host, James F. Thomas IV.
Hello and welcome to the Throwback Thursday show. Each week, I'll pick events and places from the past and help you relive them. Hashtag TBT style. By doing so, we can all learn a little bit about who we are and how we can influence the future. Welcome to today's Hashtag TBT show, ladies and gentlemen, broadcasting live from New Orleans, Louisiana, the historical city of New Orleans, Louisiana. It's only fitting we do it from here. But first, here are your April 9th, 2015 headlines, courtesy of the BBC. The Boston bomber was found guilty yesterday. The man accused of bombing the Boston Marathon in 2013 has been found guilty and now waits to hear if he will face the death penalty. That process could take quite a while. And Obama also announced he wishes an end to gay conversion therapy. U.S. President Barack Obama has condemned psychiatric therapies designed to repair gay, lesbian, and transgender youth in an announcement the president made yesterday. This is a historic announcement. And over in South Carolina, protests continue over the fatal shooting of an unarmed man by a police officer who has been charged with murder. In other news, a blogger gets 20 years for son's death, Ferguson elects black counselors, and Zynga founder Mark Pincus set to return to the helm. Those are your headlines for April 9th, 2015. We're sure to revisit them on a future Throwback Thursday show in about a year. But on to today's historical news. Quite a few headlines. It's obviously impossible to go through the entire history of the world in a single broadcast. So I will go over the ones most important, or at least deemed most important by our large staff who compiles these shows. That's one person, but never mind. So today, April 9th, 1865, our headline reads, Robert E. Lee surrenders. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. On April 9th, 1865, this day in history. Pound, TBT. General Robert E. Lee surrendered his 28,000 troops to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia, effectively ending the American Civil War. Forced to abandon the Confederate capital of Richmond, blocked from joining the surviving Confederate force in North Carolina, and harassed constantly by Union cavalry, Lee simply had no other option. In retreating from the Union Army's Appomattox campaign, the Army of Northern Virginia had stumbled through the Virginia countryside, stripped of food and supplies. At one point, Union cavalry forces under General Sheridan had actually overrun and outrun Lee's army, blocking their retreat and taking 6,000 prisoners while they were at it, at Sailor's Creek. Desertions were mounting daily, and by April 8th, 1865, the Confederates were surrounded with no possibility of escape, and on April 9th, Lee sent a message to Grant announcing that he was willing to surrender. The two generals met in the parlor of the Wilmer McLean home at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both Lee and Grant held the highest rank in their respective armies of the North and the South. Lee, obviously, the Confederate general. Grant, the Union general. One thing, however, they both knew each other slightly during the Mexican War and exchanged some very awkward personal inquiries. Characteristically, Grant, who was not known for his attire or appearance, arrived to the meeting in his muddy field uniform, while Lee turned out in full dress attire, complete with sash and sword, looking like a Southern gentleman. Lee asked for the terms, and Grant hurriedly scribbled them out, and all officers and men were to be pardoned as part of the agreement, and they would be sent home with their private property, most importantly, sent with their horses, which could be used for late spring planting. Officers would keep their sidearms, and Lee's starving men would be fed by the Union Army via their rations. When the surrender was announced and it was official, a band began to play, and General Grant quickly turned to them and told them to keep quiet. He said, "The war is over, and the rebels are our countrymen again." Although scattered resistance did continue for several weeks afterwards, all practical purposes indicate that the Civil War officially came to an end on this day in history, April 9th, 1865, in Appomattox, Virginia. In other stories from this day in history, President Kennedy threw out the first pitch. I apologize. I'm having a bad allergy attack right now, but I'm going to power through this because that's just how I roll. I'm going to power through this. Kennedy threw out the first pitch at new D.C. Stadium this day, April 9th, 1962. President John F. Kennedy threw out the first ceremonial pitch in the new stadium, which was simply called D.C. Stadium. And in doing so, he continued a long-standing tradition that began in 1910 when President William H. Taft threw out a Major League Baseball during the opening pitch at Washington, D.C.'s old Griffith Stadium. Even before Kennedy and Taft, many presidents had associations with the nation's favorite pastime. For instance, Andrew Johnson was the first president to invite a baseball team from the National Baseball Club to the White House for a visit in 1865. Abraham Lincoln was an ardent baseball player. He actually erected a baseball field on the lawn of the White House. President Ulysses S. Grant, whom we just discussed, also finds himself in this historical chapter, along with Chester Arthur, because they invited professional teams to the White House in 1869 and 83, respectively. Benjamin Harris was the first president to attend a Major League Baseball game, and in 1907, the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues gave Theodore Roosevelt a lifetime pass to attend any game he wanted to, in spite of the fact that Roosevelt was simply not a fan of the game. In 1915, Woodrow Wilson became the first president to attend a World Series game. That's not, this day in history, but it's all tied into these presidents who have thrown out historical first pitches, on this day in history. And that, again, April 9th, 1962, President John F. Kennedy throws out the first ceremonial pitch at D.C. Stadium. I apologize for the Freudian slip earlier, ladies and gentlemen. I really don't do that very often, but when I do, it just kills me. I do have a legitimate excuse, though, but anyhow. Other historical events on this day in history. In 1483, Edward V, who was 12 years old, succeeded his father, Edward IV, as the King of England. He was never crowned, though, and he disappeared, presumed to be murdered, after being incarcerated in the Tower of London with his younger brother, Richard. The princes in the Tower, as they were named. In 1869, the Hudson Bay Company cedes its territory to Canada. That's pretty big news. And in 2003, Baghdad fell to U.S. forces, ending the invasion of Iraq. But the surrender resulted in widespread looting and a perpetual war, which will hopefully be done soon. In our sub headline of the day, I picked this date in 1731, the beginning, at least according to historians, of the War of Jenkins' Ear. The British mariner, Robert Jenkins's ear was cut off by Spanish guard Costa in the Caribbean. Later, the catalyst for the war between Britain and Spain. Now, the background to this is at the conclusion of the War of the Spanish Succession, the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 gave Great Britain a 30-year asiento, which was originally owned by the Spanish. the asiento was the contract right to supply an unlimited number of slaves to the Spanish colonies and 500 tons of unnamed goods per year. This provided British traders and smugglers potential inroads into the traditionally closed markets over in Spanish America. But Great Britain and Spain were often fighting during this period. They were often at war, like very bloody battles, fighting one another in the aptly named War of the Quadruple Alliance, which went from 1718 to 20, and the blockade of Portobello in 1726, along with the Anglo-Spanish War, which lasted 2 years as well, from 1727 to 1729. In the Treaty of Seville from 1729, following the Anglo-Spanish War, Britain had accorded Spanish warships the right to stop British traders and verify if the asiento right was being respected. Over that time, however, the Spanish became suspicious that British traders were abusing the contract and began boarding ships, and they also began confiscating their cargoes. This did not go over well with the British government. After very strained relations between 1727 and 1732, the situation improved between 32 and 37 when Sir Robert Walpole supported Spain during the War of the Polish Succession. Because the causes of the problems remained, and when the opposition against Walpole grew, so did the anti-Spanish sentiment among the British populace and the local public. Walpole gave in to the pressure and approved the sending of troops to the West Indies and a squadron to Gibraltar under Admiral Haddock, causing an immediate Spanish reaction. Spain then asked for financial compensation, which led to the British demand to annul visitation rights agreed to in the Treaty of Seville. In reaction, King Philip V of Spain annulled the asiento right and had all British ships in Spanish harbors confiscated. The Convention of Pardo, an attempt to mediate the dispute, broke down, and on the 14th of August, Britain recalled its ambassador to Spain and officially declared war on October the 23rd, 1739. Despite the Pacte de Famille, France remained neutral, normally France was getting involved in these sort of conflicts, but nevertheless, Walpole was deeply reluctant to declare war and reportedly remarked of the jubilation in Britain, quoting, "They are ringing their bells, soon they will be wringing their hands." One of those famous old school Britain quotes. The War of Jenkins' Ear, also known as Guerra del Asiento in Spain, was a conflict between Britain and Spain that lasted from 1739 to 1748, with major operations largely ended by 1742. Its unusual name, coined by Thomas Carlyle in 1858, that is much later, where he discussed Jenkins' Ear in several passages of his History of Frederick the Third in 1858, most notably in Book 9, Chapter 6, where he refers specifically to the War of Jenkins' Ear. Well, this term stuck. The severed ear of Robert Jenkins was allegedly exhibited before the British Parliament, and the tale of the ear separation from Jenkins following the boarding of his vessel by Spanish coast guards in 1731 provided the impetus to war against the Spanish Empire, ostensibly to encourage the Spanish not to renege on the lucrative asiento contract we just discussed. After 1742, the war was subsumed by the wider War of the Austrian Succession. There will be a podcast on this later, because there are a lot of Thursdays in the War of Austrian Succession that matter, that I will be discussing. But anyhow, this one involved most of the powers of Europe. It was considered sort of a world war at the time. Peace arrived with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. From the British perspective, the war was notable because it was the first time that a regiment of colonial American troops was raised and placed on the establishment, made a part of the regular British Army and sent to fight outside